When Ibrahim Traoré walked into a luxury hotel lobby, the receptionist barely looked up, rolling her eyes at his request for a room. But when he handed over his ID, her smirk vanished, her hands trembled, and her heart pounded in her chest. She had just insulted Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. What happens when you disrespect a leader without knowing who he is? But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The marble floors gleamed under Ibrahim's worn shoes as he took a deep breath, scanning the lavish lobby. After a grueling flight and no entourage by choice, he wanted nothing more than a quiet room and a moment of peace. "Excuse me," he said politely, approaching the front desk. The young receptionist, chewing gum and scrolling through her phone, sighed dramatically before glancing up. Her eyes swept over his plain jacket and travel-worn face. Without a word, she tossed a clipboard towards him. "Fill this out," she muttered, clearly unimpressed. "And just so you know, we require payment up front for guests like you." Ibrahim's brow furrowed. His heartbeat quickened, not out of anger, but surprise. It wasn't the first time he'd been judged by appearance, but this level of blatant disrespect in such a prestigious hotel was rare. Remaining calm, he filled out the form in silence. When he handed it back, the receptionist didn't even glance at it. Instead, she smirked and crossed her arms. "We're fully booked," she said flatly, without checking the system. "Try somewhere. More affordable." A flicker of tension ran through Ibrahim's chest. His security detail, stationed discreetly near the entrance in plain clothes, exchanged subtle glances but stayed put, per his standing orders. Ibrahim reached into his inner pocket and calmly placed his diplomatic ID on the counter. The receptionist, still oozing arrogance, lazily dragged it towards herself. But as her eyes landed on the official emblem and the name Ibrahim Traoré, her face turned ghostly pale. Her throat tightened. The gum nearly slipped from her mouth. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably as she looked up at him, really looked this time. The weight of her mistake crashed down like a tidal wave. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. I'll get the manager," she stammered, voice cracking as she stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a stack of brochures. Ibrahim said nothing. His steady gaze followed her as she vanished into the office behind the desk. Seconds later, muffled voices could be heard, panic lacing every word. The manager stormed out, straightening his tie, a look of irritation on his face. Without even glancing at Ibrahim, he snapped, "Sir, I'm afraid we have a strict policy. We don't tolerate loitering in this establishment." Ibrahim's jaw tightened. His pulse echoed in his ears. The manager reached for the ID still lying on the counter. As his eyes scanned the card, his confident expression shattered in an instant. His hand froze midair, his eyes widening in horror as he slowly looked up to meet Ibrahim's gaze, realizing too late who stood before him. The manager's fingers twitched as he clutched Ibrahim Traoré's ID, his face draining of color. For a heartbeat, the entire lobby seemed to stand still. I'll be right back," he muttered, spinning on his heel and disappearing into the office, slamming the door behind him. Inside, muffled panic erupted. The receptionist's voice cracked as she whispered frantically, "It's really him. The president. I didn't know. He looked so ordinary." The manager cursed under his breath. "Why didn't you check the system? Why didn't you look at his name? I thought he was... Don't think, we're in serious trouble." Meanwhile, Ibrahim stood calmly at the front desk, his expression unreadable. But beneath his composed exterior, his pulse was steady and deliberate, like a man used to controlling storms. Other guests began to notice the tension. A bellboy whispered to a colleague, eyes darting toward Ibrahim with growing recognition. A woman in a business suit paused mid-step, her phone halfway to her ear, sensing something was off. Minutes dragged by. Finally, the manager reappeared, wiping sweat from his brow and forcing a strained smile. "Mr. Traoré," he began, his voice trembling despite his attempt at professionalism. "It seems there was a misunderstanding." Ibrahim raised an eyebrow but remained silent. The manager continued, desperation creeping into his tone. "Unfortunately, due to a system error, we appear to be overbooked, but I assure you, we're doing everything possible to accommodate you." Ibrahim's eyes narrowed slightly. He could hear the receptionist breathing heavily behind the desk, her hands nervously fidgeting with a stack of papers. "I don't believe this is about a system error," Ibrahim said calmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to raise it to command a room. The manager swallowed hard, tugging at his collar. "I'll contact our regional director immediately," he stammered, backing away. At that moment, one of the hotel guests, a middle-aged man with a diplomatic pin on his lapel, approached the front desk, eyes wide with recognition. "Mr. President," the guest said respectfully, inclining his head. "Is everything all right?" The receptionist let out a faint gasp, realizing the attention was growing. The The bellboy dropped his clipboard. The manager's forced smile shattered completely. He reached for his phone with shaking hands. Ibrahim leaned in slightly, his gaze locking onto the manager's panicked eyes. "There's no need for explanations, Hugh," Ibrahim said, his tone sharper now. "Call your director, now." The manager's fingers fumbled across the keypad as he realized. This situation was spiraling far beyond anything he could control. The manager's hand trembled as he held the phone to his ear, pacing behind the front desk like a trapped animal. Each ring seemed louder than the last, echoing his growing panic. "Come on, pick up," he whispered under his breath, sweat beading on his forehead. Ibrahim stood motionless in the center of the lobby. His calm presence was now commanding the attention of every staff member and guest nearby. Conversations had died down. Phones were subtly lowered. People knew something was happening. They just didn't know what yet. Finally, the call connected. "Sir, we have a situation," the manager began, voice cracking. Yes, it's about a guest. No, not just any guest." His eyes flicked toward Ibrahim, who remained composed, hands clasped behind his back. Behind the desk, the receptionist could barely contain her panic. Her fingers dug into the edge of the counter, knuckles white as she replayed every dismissive word she had thrown at him. "Guests like you. Try somewhere more affordable." Her stomach churned. She risked a glance at Ibrahim and immediately regretted it. He wasn't looking at her, but that made it worse. The weight of his silence was suffocating. Suddenly the manager stiffened. "Yes, sir, understood." He hung up and turned back to Ibrahim, forcing a hollow smile. "Our director will be here within the hour to personally resolve this." Ibrahim gave a single nod, but before the manager could scurry away, a voice spoke up from across the lobby. "Is that really President Traoré?" All heads turned toward a well-dressed woman holding her phone, the screen glowing with a news article displaying Ibrahim's photo. Murmurs rippled through the room like wildfire. The receptionist's legs nearly gave out beneath her. A bellboy, realizing the gravity of the situation, whispered urgently to a colleague, "We're dead. Do you know who he is? He's not just some politician. He's a head of state." The manager raised his hands, trying to calm the growing whispers. "Please, everyone, return to your business. This is a private matter." But it was too late. The atmosphere had shifted. Ibrahim finally broke his silence, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "I came here for rest, not spectacle," he said, his gaze sweeping over the staff, lingering on the receptionist, whose eyes filled with tears. The automatic doors slid open, and two men in suits entered hurriedly, earpieces barely visible, members of his security detail who had been waiting outside. Their presence alone sent a wave of unease through the room. The manager's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. "The director is already on his way up," he muttered. Ibrahim stepped forward, his posture radiating authority. "There's no need for more excuses," he said quietly but firmly. His next words sent a chill through everyone within earshot. "By the time your director arrives, I expect a proper explanation, and not just for me." The receptionist let out a shaky breath, tears now streaming down her face. The elevator dinged, and as the doors slid open, the hotel's regional director stepped out, his expression grim, completely unaware that his worst nightmare was about to begin. The elevator door slid open with a soft chime, revealing a sharply dressed man in his 50s, flanked by two assistants. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he strode into the lobby, exuding authority, until he saw the manager's ashen face and the trembling receptionist behind the desk. "What's going on?" the director demanded, his tone sharp and impatient. Before the manager could respond, his eyes landed on Ibrahim Traoré. Recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. His confident stride faltered mid-step. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The weight of his position, and the disaster unfolding before him, became instantly clear. "Mr. President," he finally managed, his voice hollow and strained. He quickly adjusted his tie, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. I wasn't informed of your arrival." Ibrahim's gaze was steady, unreadable. The silence stretched, suffocating the room. "I didn't think I needed an announcement to receive basic respect," Ibrahim replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut steel. The director swallowed hard, shooting a furious glance at the manager and receptionist. "This is unacceptable. I assure you, Mr. President, this was a terrible misunderstanding." Before Ibrahim could respond, a commotion erupted outside the glass doors. A journalist with a camera phone pressed against the window, snapping photos. The receptionist gasped. "How did they find out?" One of Ibrahim's security agents leaned in and whispered, "Mr. President, it seems someone leaked the situation. Local media is arriving." The director's face turned from pale to crimson. Get them out of here, he barked at his staff. But it was too late. The story had already begun to spread. Guests were recording on their phones, whispers flying through the lobby. Desperate, the director pivoted back to Ibrahim. Please, sir, allow us to make this right. We'll offer you the presidential suite, complimentary, of course, along with... Ibrahim raised a hand, silencing him instantly. This isn't about a room, he said, his voice low but powerful. It's about how you treat people when you don't know who they are. The director's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. The receptionist was now openly crying, her hands covering her face. I'll issue a formal apology, the director stammered. To you, personally, and will release a statement to the press. Ibrahim stepped forward, his presence alone commanding absolute attention. You think a carefully worded statement will erase what just happened? He asked, his gaze piercing through the director's thin facade of control. No. This isn't just a mistake, it's a reflection of your culture here. The director's knees nearly buckled. His assistant stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Ibrahim turned slightly, addressing both the staff and the gathering crowd of guests. Respect is not reserved for titles or appearances, he said. It should be given to every human being. The director was about to speak again when Ibrahim's phone buzzed. One glance at the screen, and a faint smile crossed his lips. He looked back at the director, his next words sealing the hotel's fate. I won't be the one addressing the press, Ibrahim said calmly. Your actions will. As the director's face twisted in panic, Ibrahim nodded to his security team, who opened the lobby doors to a swarm of reporters flooding inside, cameras flashing. The storm had arrived. The lobby erupted into chaos as reporters stormed inside, cameras flashing like lightning strikes. The director raised his hands, shouting at security, "Get them out! This is private property!" But no one was listening. The media had smelled blood, and there was no stopping them now. Mr. Traoré, Mr. President, is it true you were denied service? Were you discriminated against? Will there be legal action? Ibrahim stood tall amidst the storm, perfectly composed. The flashing lights reflected in his calm, unwavering eyes. His security team formed a subtle barrier around him. But Ibrahim raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. The director rushed to the center of the lobby, his voice cracking as he addressed the reporters. There has been a misunderstanding, he blurted out, sweat dripping down his face. The hotel holds the utmost respect for all our guests, including President Traoré. We are working to resolve this privately. The reporters didn't buy it for a second. Ibrahim took a step forward, and instantly every microphone turned toward him. The room fell into a tense silence, everyone holding their breath. But instead of anger or demands, Ibrahim spoke with measured calm. I did not call the press, he began, his voice resonating through the marble halls. But since you're here, let me clarify, this isn't about me. I've faced far greater challenges than being judged by my appearance. He turned his gaze toward the trembling receptionist, then to the director. This is about how people in power treat those they think are beneath them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could accept your apologies, Ibrahim continued, and walk away with a free room and a carefully worded statement. But that would solve nothing. The director's face contorted in desperation. Please, Mr. President, we'll implement staff training, donate to charity, whatever it takes to fix this. Ibrahim's next move shocked everyone. He reached into his pocket, not for his phone, but for a small notebook. He flipped it open and read aloud. As of today, I'm launching an initiative in partnership with several organizations to ensure hospitality businesses across the region undergo mandatory ethical training focused on dignity, equality, and respect. The reporters erupted with questions, the story shifting from scandal to reform. The director staggered backward, realizing this wasn't just a PR disaster. It was becoming a global example. Ibrahim closed the notebook and locked eyes with the director one last time. This hotel will be the first case study, he said quietly. But every word hit like a hammer. The receptionist collapsed onto a nearby chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The manager stood frozen, staring into nothingness. As Ibrahim began to walk toward the exit, a reporter called out, Mr. Traoré, will you ever return to this hotel? Ibrahim paused at the door, glanced over his shoulder, and with a faint smile replied, Only when I know the staff treats every guest like a president. As the doors closed behind him, the director's phone buzzed violently. Headquarters was calling, and the look on his face said it all. The worst was far from over. The story spread like wildfire. By nightfall, headlines around the world echoed the same message. Luxury hotel disrespects President Ibrahim Traoré. Turns into global lesson on respect. From humiliation to reform. How a president handled discrimination with dignity. Social media exploded. Clips of Ibrahim's calm response and his parting words were shared millions of times within hours. Hashtags calling for better treatment of all customers trended globally. Inside the hotel, the atmosphere was suffocating. The receptionist had been escorted out in tears, her employment terminated before the day was over. The manager followed shortly after, his dismissal swift and merciless. The director? He faced an emergency board meeting where words like reputation damage, public relations crisis, petito, and legal liability echoed through the conference room. His fate was sealed before he even dialed in. But outside those walls, something far bigger was happening. Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just walked away from humiliation, he had transformed it into a movement. Within days, hospitality chains across Africa and beyond pledged to review their staff policies, fearing they'd be the next headline. In his private residence, Ibrahim sat by a window overlooking the city skyline. His phone buzzed non-stop, calls from leaders, journalists, activists. But for now, he let it ring. Layla, one of his senior advisors, entered the room quietly. "Mr. President, the initiative is gaining traction faster than we expected. The UN just reached out for collaboration." Ibrahim nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "This was never about me," he said softly. "It's about how quickly people judge when they think no one is watching." Layla hesitated before asking, "Do you regret how it unfolded?" Ibrahim allowed a faint smile. "No. Sometimes the world needs a reminder that power isn't worn on your sleeve." As night fell, news outlets continued to replay the moment Ibrahim left the hotel, his words etched into public memory. "Only when I know the staff treats every guest like a president." Weeks passed, but the conversation didn't fade. Policies were rewritten, training programs were launched. Yet for every promise made, the question lingered. Had people truly learned, or were they just afraid of being caught? This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.